Hello everyone and welcome to a new video dedicated to our beloved Snoopy and the world of Peanuts. Charlie Brown is alone. He looks around and there's no one to talk to, no one to play with. Yet, as always, he seeks a way to deal with his melancholy with his unique style. Today's strip gives us a tender moment in which the little protagonist attempts to combat his sense of isolation with a gesture that is as simple as it is meaningful. He picks up the telephone receiver and seeks comfort in an unfamiliar voice. This scene might seem bizarre to modern eyes, but in the 1950s it had a very special meaning. At that time, there were no personal telephones, cell phones, or the internet. Calls went through human operators, figures who were often the only voices available to those who had no one to talk to. And so, in his innocence, Charlie Brown turns precisely to the operator, not for an important call, but for something much deeper, a story, a tale that can keep him company. The idea that a child calls the operator just to feel less lonely is as tender as it is melancholy, and shows us once again Charles Schulz's talent for telling the story of childhood life in an authentic way. It is not just a gag, but a portrait of how even the littlest ones can feel the weight of loneliness. This strip is one of many testaments to Schulz's sensitivity, who with just a few words and an essential drawing manages to strike deep chords in readers' hearts. In the first vignette, Charlie Brown is sitting on the ground, his legs spread apart, his gaze lost in the void. He says he is lonely around there, and it is evident that he is talking to himself. This is an important detail. Charlie Brown has no one to whom he can express his sadness, so he does so aloud, as if he hopes that someone, somewhere might hear him. The scene is constructed with extreme simplicity, no background elements, no distractions. Just him and his state of mind. This is one of the hallmarks of the early Peanuts. Schulz does not fill the vignettes with superfluous details, but lets the characters and their emotions do the talking. This stylistic choice is crucial to the emotional impact of the strip. The absence of environmental details amplifies Charlie Brown's sense of isolation, causing the reader to focus solely on him and his words. The emptiness around the character almost becomes an extension of his state of mind, underscoring the melancholy that permeates many of the early strips. Moreover, the fact that he speaks out loud, with no one around, adds an additional layer of meaning. It is not just a simple inner reflection, but a real silent cry, a way of making his feelings of loneliness tangible. This is one of the first demonstrations of how Schulz can convey deep emotions with a few essential strokes and minimal, but extremely effective dialogue. In the second vignette, we see Charlie Brown walking slowly, his head slightly down, sighing. The sigh is an important detail because it makes his state of mind even more obvious. Schulz does not need to fill the scene with elements to communicate emotion. An expression, a posture, and a single word are enough to bring us into the character's inner world. The use of visual silence and graphic simplicity is one of the hallmarks of Schulz's style. There is no need for elaborate backgrounds or complex dialogue. The emotional weight of the scene is all focused on the figure of Charlie Brown. This aspect is fundamental to the Peanuts narrative because it allows each reader to identify with the character and feel his or her state of mind directly. Interestingly, Charlie Brown, despite being surrounded by friends in the Peanuts world, often feels lonely. His loneliness is not only physical but also emotional. It is the feeling of never really being understood, of always being one step behind others. This is an aspect that will characterize him throughout the series, helping to make him so iconic and incredibly human. It is precisely this fragility that makes Charlie Brown a timeless character, capable of speaking to different generations with the same intensity. In the third vignette, Charlie Brown picks up the telephone and calls the operator. This scene is interesting because it might seem unusual today, but in the 1950s it was perfectly understandable. Before the advent of hotlines, many calls went through telephone operators who were responsible for sorting communications. It was a vital role, but also an impersonal one. The operator was a neutral voice, an entity always present but never involved in the conversations. For Charlie Brown, however, it represents something more, a certainty. The operator will always respond, because it is his job. And in that moment, for him, it is not important to talk to someone who knows him, but simply to someone. This gesture reveals a lot about Charlie Brown's character. He is not just a sad child, he is a child actively seeking a solution to his loneliness. There is also a subtle contrast between the practicality of the phone call and its implied melancholy. At a time when the telephone was a means of shortening distance, Charlie Brown uses it to fill an emotional void. It is as if, although he is aware that the operator will not be able to offer him true companionship, he nevertheless finds comfort in the certainty of an answer. There is a mixture of childlike naivete and a deep awareness of the world around him in this choice. Moreover, this scene reflects the sense of alienation that Charles Schulz could convey with great sensitivity. Charlie Brown does not seek a specific friend, does not try to call someone who can really understand him. His request for contact is generic, almost anonymous, but for that very reason universal. It is the human need to be heard, even by a voice that has no face. In the fourth vignette comes the most touching moment. Charlie Brown, with the handset to his ear, asks the operator if he can tell him a story. It is an incredibly tender request because it shows how much he needs a friendly voice. He is not looking for information, he is not making a practical request. He simply wants to hear something to keep him company. This scene encapsulates deep emotion because it reflects the universal desire for connection and comfort. Charlie Brown, with his innate melancholy and insecurity, expresses something much greater: the need to be heard and reassured. Children, and not just them, find in stories a refuge, a way to feel less alone. Through stories, they can travel with their minds, dream, find answers to questions they do not even know they have. In a world that often seems distant or indifferent, a simple story can make a difference. It can be a bridge to another reality, a moment of everyday magic that transforms loneliness into a shared experience. And in Charlie Brown's gesture there is just that, the desire to feel part of something, to fill that silence with words that mean something, with a voice that can accompany him, if only for a moment. Today's strip is a perfect example of the depth of Peanuts. In just a few cartoons, Schulz manages to paint a moving picture that touches on universal themes such as loneliness, the search for comfort, and the power of stories. Charlie Brown is not just a child who feels sad. He is a symbol of all of us, of those moments when we seek human contact, even in the most unusual ways. And the fact that he chooses to ask for a story, rather than just a conversation, says a lot about his sensitivity. He is a child who needs more than just an answer. He needs a story that transports him elsewhere, that makes him feel less alone, if only for a moment. This strip was published on December 30th, 1950, at a time of year that, for many, is characterized by times of celebration and companionship. But not for everyone. With this scene, Schulz reminds us that loneliness can strike anyone at any time. And that is what makes Peanuts so special: their ability to speak to everyone with simplicity and depth at the same time.
If you enjoyed yourselves, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the little bell to stay updated, and see you next, friends.